Alright, the next chapter, or not next chapter, the next part of the first chapter of this book is called Property. Good fences make good neighbors. I'm sure you've heard of this. It's Robert Frost. It's a very, very, very old saying. And basically, in 1750, there was a famous painting by Thomas Gainsborough, and it depicted a nobleman. It was like perfect scenario, the pride of ownership, basically. And then this is the image here. So it's basically land and a wife and a gun and just looking very kind of oppressive, maybe we could say. Animals in domestication. There's a lot of paintings on that. There's a lot of debt, because a man is born free, and everywhere he is, he's in chains. And this is a famous quote by Jean-Jacques Rousseau. The English jails back in the days overflowed with debtors in the 18th century. Those who couldn't pay their loans were incarcerated indefinitely until their debts were repaid. Inmates had to pay for their own keep, and their families often resorted to begging to get them out. Debt was no joke back in the day. Not only did people accrue interest and get a bad credit, etc., but they actually went to prison. Credit has a history that goes back almost to the beginnings of civilizations. For example, early banks, like the Bard of Peruzzi banks of the 10th and 13th centuries, extended credit to monarchs so that latter could afford to go to war. But during the past century, the extension of credit has become an overwhelmingly pervasive practice that reaches not just into every government and business, but nearly every household in the industrialized world. Why this vast recent expansion of credit? One word sums it up: growth. Credit gives us the ability to consume now, pay later. It is an expression of belief on the part of both borrower and lender that later the borrower will have a surplus with which to repay today's new debt with interest. While still being covering basic operating expenses, we will be better off in the future than we are today. Modern economics theory treats debt as a neutral transfer between saver and consumer. In a world at the end of growth, it becomes anything other than neutral, as the savers will never be able to obtain their deferred consumption. At the end of growth is the ultimate credit event, as everyone gradually comes to realize there will be no surplus later with which to repay interest on debt that is accruing now. This was written by Richard Heinberg in a book called The End of Growth. Back in the days, the pioneer days, empire, building your empire is also very important. The rich take what they want, and the poor grant what they must. So, during the 350 years of the industrial age, a good fraction of Europe did consume more than it produced, by the simple expedient of owning most of the rest of the world and exploiting it for their own economic benefits. As late as 1914, the vast majority of the world's land surface was either ruled directly from a European capital, occupied by people of European descent, or dominated by European powers through some form of radically unequal treaty relationship. The accelerating drawn down of fossil fuels throughout the era shifted the process into overdrive, allowing the minority of the Earth's population who lived in Europe, or the more privileged of the Earth's population who lived in Europe, or the more the United States, the first among them, not only to adopt what were, by the standards of all other human societies, extravagantly lavish lifestyles, but to be able to expect that those lifestyles would become an even more lavish in the future. Growth, lavishness, it just was getting more and more as we oppress everyone around us. Only a tiny fraction of the people of the industrial world has begun to deal with the hard fact that those days are over. European domination of the globe came apart explosively in the 4 brutal decades between 1914, when the First World War broke, and 1954, when the fall of the French Indochina, sorry, pardon my French, put a period on what was left of the Europe's imperial role, never achieved the level of global dominance that European nations took for granted until 1914, Compare the British Empire, which directly ruled a quarter of the Earth's land surface, with the hole and corner arrangements that allow America to maintain garrisons in other people's countries around the world. Now, the second and arguably more important source of Euro-American wealth and power, the exploitation of 500 million years of prehistoric sunlight in the form of fossil fuels, has peaked and entered its own decline, with consequences that bid fair to be at least as drastic as those that followed the shattering of the Pax Europaea in 1914. So, this book, I'm pretty sure, was written in the early 2000s, and it already talked about the very fast decline of the usage of fossil fuels, how the riches that we were built upon in the West here are the riches built upon unfortunate oppression of others. That time is running out. And it seems like we should find another way of being. It seems like it would be the proper thing to do at this point. But it seems like the businesses don't want to accept that this growth is not growth anymore for some strange reason. The draconian system is still intact, and I don't know why. So, finance. All money is a matter of belief, according to Adam Smith. When was the day that money became an idol instead of an instrument? Was it August 15th, 1971, when to pay for Vietnam War, Nixon shocked the world by erasing the gold standard, thereby unilaterally making the value of the U.S. dollar the reserve currency of the world economic? Or was it in the waning months of 2008 when the central banks of the industrialized nations purchased around $3 trillion of debt from certain corrupt institutions operating in the private sector? What does that sound like? BlackRock, maybe? When was it exactly that money became the lifeblood of our civilization? Good question. This is just an image, and it's very powerful, but it's an image of a building, and the whole building is a bank, and it's people working at night with these industrial fake lights on. Instead of being at home with their families, they're here in this building working. Like, I can't look at this. This is a typical building in, I'm guessing, New York, and it's all finance. Working at night. It's just, it's cursed. It's cursed. Beautiful, isn't it? This is the culture of the West. Beautiful culture we have here. Money Mart, Dairy Queen. Beautiful. Alright, sorry if this video was kind of all over the place. My dogs were being bad. They bark when there's people that come by, and I live in an apartment building, so I'm sorry if that was a little distracting, but I will end this video, and I want you to ask your professor, what should the role of finance be in our society? What about the role of banks? I hope you guys have a good day, and I want you to read your Bibles.